It is Wednesday, April 17th, 2019. Welcome to the microcast. And it's been a slow news cycle. Other than the big fire at Notre Dame in France, there really hasn't been anything new in the news cycle. It's rather unusual, actually. It hasn't been like this for many months. Tomorrow is going to be a very different story with the Mueller report being released. So we'll see what happens there. But I want to take this time to talk to you about vaccines. I've been pro-vaccine all my life, but recently I have had to change my mind. And the reason is, as somebody that likes to be scientific about his approach to the world, to observe and to measure the world around me and to try to make sense of it. And those of you that have been following me for a while know some of the disciplines that I'm most interested in. When we look at what is going on with vaccines right now, there are some very troubling things that really aren't being discussed, and I want to share them with you. There's basically four specious arguments that people that are very pro-vaccine continue to use, and let's go over them. Number one, vaccines work. Number two, vaccines are safe. Number three, we are kept relatively pathogen-free here in the West because of vaccines. And four, that we must vaccinate as many people as possible for herd immunity to work. And people say that herd immunity kicks in once about 85 to 90% of people have been vaccinated. Every single one of these claims is complete and utter and total nonsense. And for those of you rolling their eyes, then let's go over them again one by one and let's dig into them a little bit. Number one, vaccines work. Well, we know for a fact that the measles vaccine and the whooping cough vaccines and the mumps vaccines in particular are not working right now. And we have multiple instances of this. We have a school district in California, 1,800 people in the school district, 1,600 people in the school district, 18 unvaccinated people amongst those 1,600. And they just had a big outbreak of whooping cough there 1 month ago. And those 18 students that were not vaccinated were removed immediately from the picture. And so what's going on there? We've got a 99% vaccination rate, and all of a sudden we have an outbreak of whooping cough. It's very interesting. It's no surprise it's in LA County, because LA County, San Francisco, we're hearing what's going on there with the homeless people living on the streets and defecating everywhere, and unsanitary, unhygienic conditions that are leading to disease like this. But we don't have just that. We have multiple outbreaks. In fact, you're probably hearing on the news right now about the way that measles is really starting to take off all around the world right now because the vaccine doesn't work. Now, the pro-vaxxer usually says, well, but the problem is that all of these people that are getting the measles are the unvaccinated people. The problem with that is that's not true at all. It is the complete other way around. Unvaccinated people don't seem to be getting affected by these outbreaks at all. Probably because they had measles when they were younger and now they're fully immune to measles. But I have been looking at these outbreaks for at least the last 2 years, closer to 3 years. Every single outbreak, patient ground zero was a fully vaccinated individual, and in almost every single case, there were no unvaccinated people amongst those that caught the pathogen, period. I would say at about 1/3 of those outbreaks, there were a few, and I do mean just a few, 1, 2, or 3 amongst the group that were not vaccinated that also came down with measles. We're seeing this over and over and over again. So, the measles vaccine, the whooping cough vaccine, they don't seem to be working. What about mumps? Well, we just had this frigate that's been at sea for some time, 700 sailors on board, and big outbreak of mumps on board. That's a very strange case. We'll come back to that one in a minute. So it seems that the point number one of the pro-vaxxer, the vaccines work, simply not true. We don't see vaccines working. We see them failing over and over and over again. Second argument is that vaccines are safe. The vaccine court, if you don't know, the government waived all liability for vaccine makers. No vaccine maker can be sued for their vaccine. And so you must go to the vaccine court. Well, basically no one ends up in the vaccine court. Very few. Except the vaccine court is currently paying out $50 million per month. $50 million per month to those injured by the vaccine. That's a lot of money. There is what they call a VAERS database that all hospitals have, that they are supposed to enter the details of anybody having an adverse vaccine reaction. And doctors and nurses readily suggest that less than 1% of all cases that are presented at the ER for a vaccine reaction are ever entered into the database. And many staff in hospitals are instructed quite sternly not to ever enter anything into the VAERS database. Very difficult to ever get your case heard before the vaccine court if nobody bothered to enter it into the VAERS database. So, are vaccines safe? Sure. If $50 million a month being paid out to people injured by vaccine is considered safe, then sure, let's call them safe. And that's ridiculous. Number 3, we are kept relatively pathogen-free because of why? Because of vaccines. False. I mean, it's completely false. And this is, you hear the pro-vaxxer say to those that get autism or some kind of condition from a vaccine, say, well, correlation is not causation. Yeah, well, being relatively pathogen-free, correlation isn't causation. Just because we're relatively pathogen-free in the West doesn't mean that's because of a vaccine. Why might we be pathogen-free in the West? Well, maybe because we believe in sanitation and hygiene. We have closed sewer systems. We have plumbing. We have running fresh water that comes out of a tap. We have hot showers. We have soap. We have bleach. America is sterility crazy. We have Puracell. We have hand wipes. We have everything you can possibly imagine, including helicopter parents making sure their kids wash their hands 50 times a day. Don't touch your face. Don't put your fingers in your nose. Don't do. So we understand how pathogens spread, and we condition our offspring to limit the most risky behavior so that they don't transmit pathogens one to another. We don't have cattle shitting in the streets anymore. We don't have backyard chickens all over the place like we used to. And we don't have our children playing in the street with all of those things. We don't have anywhere near as many dogs as we used to, and almost none of them are stray dogs that carry rabies and other pathogens. We live in a relatively pathogen-free society because of sanitation and hygiene and a good, nutritious diet, healthy activity outside in the sun, exposure to the sun, getting vitamin D, getting our good vegetables, our nutrients, and so on and so forth. How do we know this? We can just look at the third world, where they've vaccinated almost everybody, and it's made almost no difference. Oh, you haven't heard that though, right? They don't tell you that part. Oh, but now you think, oh wait, all these people still just have this crazy low life expectancy all throughout Africa. What's going on there? Because their sanitation and hygiene standards and their level of nutrition didn't change. You can't just give somebody a vaccine and allow them to live in squalor and expect that they're not going to catch the pathogen. They probably will, right? The fourth argument that the pro-vaxxer makes is the herd immunity thing. And so here you've got this idea that Once we've got enough of a population that has been immunized, that'll create some kind of a protective barrier for those that haven't been vaccinated or cannot be vaccinated because of whatever reason. And so it's really important that everybody get vaccinated so we can have the herd immunity effect working. Great. Except it's just completely and utterly false. It's not a scientific idea, it's a philosophical idea. It was an idea that was postulated that might be able to occur amongst naturally immune organisms in their natural environment that have already contracted a pathogen and become naturally immune to it, and so on and so forth. It doesn't apply to vaccinated people. The other problem is that these vaccines are even acknowledged not to last more than a few years. So if you're 35 years old, the average 6-month-old has had more vaccines in their short life than what you have in your entire 35 years. And all of those things that you were vaccinated for as a child, this is really interesting to see the expression on the faces of pro-vaxxers. If you're 35 years old or over and a pro-vaxxer, and you haven't within the last 3 years gone and got updated on every single childhood vaccine you've ever had, you are unvaccinated. You are absolutely on par with an unvaccinated person, because none of the vaccines you got when you were a child have any efficacy for you today at 35 years old. It's a joke. And you probably know that but don't want to concede it, right? And so one of the most amazing cases, though, of herd immunity was going back to that frigate. We have this frigate of 700 sailors, 100% immunization rate, all recently in the last 3 years. The military goes completely overboard with vaccinations. And all of these people on board are getting mumps. Why? Because the vaccines don't work, and herd immunity is a myth. The vaccine doesn't work, or it didn't work in this situation on this ship, and herd immunity, 100% vaccination rate, not 99%, 100% didn't help. Herd immunity is a myth. It's nothing more than propaganda to try to persuade weak-willed people into getting a vaccine that doesn't do anything except cause potential harm. All my life, I was pro-vax. I remember when I started to travel the world, when I was about 20 years old, I went to the doctor. I can visualize the doctor's office downtown Queen Street in Auckland, New Zealand, where I went, female doctor, asked for everything I could possibly get. And she was a sensible doctor and said, well, where are you going? And I ended up getting a few shots that day, including a flu shot. And went down and hung out with a friend of mine who was a chemist, very much a passionate follower of the sciences as I am. And I told him what I had just done. He knew I was about to start traveling. And he said, oh, you shouldn't have done that. I'm like, what? And I remember being in the car with him, mocking him for this supposed anti-vax position that he had. I regret doing that now. But over the last 18 years or so of just observing, just looking at what's going on around me, I started to see that, wait a minute, everything is not what it seems. Everything is certainly not what they tell us. So let's go over these 4 specious arguments once again. Vaccines work. No, they don't. Vaccines are safe. No, they're not. Vaccines are keeping our society pathogen free. No, they're not. Sanitation, hygiene, and nutrition are. Herd immunity is a thing, and that'll keep us safe. No, it's not, and no, it won't, because it's not a thing. And so we've really been led down the primrose path with this vaccine issue. And I know probably the majority of you listening to this are rolling your eyes, and you think I'm an idiot. Well, I am no idiot, and I look at these things very carefully, and I encourage you to stop and to be still and to rethink this issue. Vaccines aren't keeping us safe. Vaccines are hurting so many people. We're paying out $50 million a month. That's taxpayer dollars that are going to people that have been permanently injured because they trusted health experts. A lot of trust, a lot of hope, a lot of faith that we're putting in these people, right? And you get the pro-vaxxers. And I've joined several pro-vax groups on Facebook a few months ago to kind of watch their arguments and what they say and how they respond to people. These are the biggest buffoons I've ever encountered on the internet. They don't know anything. Like, these are the most imbecilic people I've ever encountered. I encourage you to join some of these pro-vax groups and do the same thing. Don't have to post or reply. I don't. I just observe. I look at their posts, and the IQ level of some of these people is shocking. The arguments they use are so absurd. They make fun of people for actually believing in the science. It really is quite stunning. And so it's actually really been these serious pro-vaxxers that has made me open my mouth, risk my reputation, and to kind of join in the chorus of people that are now questioning the efficacy and the safety of these vaccines, and also this, correlated argument that we are being kept safe because of these vaccines. I don't find any evidence of that, actually, especially when we go back to the thing that I said before about if you're 35 or over and you haven't recently, like in the last 72 months, had all of your vaccines all over again, you are not protected, and the CDC will admit you are not protected, and they have been. They've issued several bulletins that adults must be revaccinated for all their childhood vaccines. They simply don't last very long. If you're 35 or over and you're pro-vax, you are walking proof that your argument is false. You're here, you're safe, you're living and breathing, and you think, well, yeah, because I got all my vaccines. No, sunshine, because you are as good as an unvaccinated person right now listening to this. So you need to stop and think, what's really going on here? Why are multiple countries, Japan and countries in Europe, banning some vaccines? Japan outright banned the MMR vaccine that is causing so many problems here in the United States. It's time to stop and to look at this and to not get all emotional on one side or the other. And, on both sides of this argument, you'll find deeply emotional and often irrational people. But what I do find predominantly is that when you go on to the anti-vax groups, although yes, you will find some very ridiculous young mothers who just don't have a damn clue about anything, you'll also find a lot of people that are just loaded with the data. And that's all they care about is the data, the information, the science. What can we measure and observe? Right? I always talk about those two things, observation and measurement, because that is the core of science. Right? If you're just repeating somebody else's argument, you're not being scientific. If you're repeating somebody else's white paper, you're not being scientific. It's just another appeal to authority. It's a logical fallacy. It's time to stop and think about these issues. So, long podcast here today, almost 20 minutes long. Hope I've given you some food for thought in this, and I'd like to get your opinions, pro or con. So feel free to put your positive or negative comments below and share this with anyone you think might find some value in it. Have a wonderful night. Let's see what happens with the Mueller report that is going to be released in the morning. Have a wonderful night.